So our next presenter is Mr. Dick Peterson. We're very lucky to have him today for his popular rainwater harvesting talk. He has been the coordinator of the Xeriscape and Rainwater program with the Austin Water Utility, and then he also served as the environmental program coordinator with Austin Energy Green Building. So he's been with City of Austin for 14 years. He's now retired, but does extensive rainwater workshops and seminars right here in town. So I'll turn it over to Dick for rainwater harvesting for Grow Green professionals.
Thank you. Y'all remind me, I've got $5,000 in my hand here, so I don't want to use the handheld mic because each of you can get $5,000 at the end of this presentation. So if you leave early, and if you believe this is $5,000, I have swampland in Florida. I do have a lot of money right here. You know, you've heard of revolutions and evolutions. Y'all, I believe, are part of an evolution. Eleanor McKinley, myself, John Gleason, several other people in Austin were probably part of a thing that I would call a revolution. In the mid-'80s, Denver Water Utilities was in the midst of an extreme drought, and they coined the word Xeriscape and trademarked it. City of San Antonio beat the city of Austin by 1 week and paid $5,000 to be able to use the word Xeriscape. So I'm going to charge you $5,000 each time you will use the word Xeriscape. But no, we actually paid, and Xeriscape was trademarked. Should always have a capital X. It is not Xeroscape. But, as I say, evolution or revolution, in this nice, great book that is an evolution of the Xeriscape plant guide, Grow Green has now become, in Austin, the Xeriscape movement, so to speak. But it says in the intro that less watering, fertilizing, and chemical usage required in your yard, the more you contribute to the conservation and protection of our precious water resources, our streams and lakes and aquifers. Interesting statement. When John Gleason was president of the Xeriscape Garden Club, he couldn't get permission to use city time to come to our board meetings from the Watershed Protection Department because Xeriscape had nothing to do with water quality. Evolution, revolution, water quality, and Xeriscape or Grow Green are now synonymous with Austin. And part of this process, I can say I had a little part of it with encouraging the use of rainwater harvesting for the city and having a rebate for the city. Somewhere, okay, I think I can figure this out here. I'm going real fast, folks. I am going to go fast, and so I'm going to skip questions until the end, and that way if someone has a question and I don't get to it, then you can come up and ask me, and we can get everybody out of here with $5,000 at 4 o'clock. Total hydrology planning is going to be something that's necessary for you in landscape and irrigation, and all of these little circles meet to the center to create you a total water budget. So not just native plants, but rainwater catchment, of course, but soil building and plant considerations and grading and earthworks. We're going to talk about that. And even municipality and HOA restrictions. Right now, state of Texas, you know, you're pretty much free will to do rainwater harvesting and solar panels. Used to, that was not the case, but you do have the opportunity for HOAs to say it can't go over the side of the fence height or something like that, but it's really opened up a whole lot. And I'm going to kind of bring together several different elements that, as you've talked about earlier today, but rainwater harvesting methods can use this passive catchment, which has been mentioned, but maybe not as that word, but depressions in parking lots were an anomaly 10 years ago. We used to raise the parking islands, plant trees in it, direct the water away. There's no such thing as away. Water never goes away. It just goes to somebody else. So we're now depressing little islands in the landscape. We're seeing the sheet flow of water as a resource. So I'm going to show you some tanks. Yeah, I'll show you some tanks. But if you think about when you're designing your landscape, that you may not even have to have a cistern to harvest the rainwater. That the cistern is an active catchment system. So you're going to have some place to store this, some location, whether it be above ground, below ground, we'll discuss that. But the passive type of irrigation or catchment can be done a whole lot easier, and it can reduce this stormwater runoff that compounds downstream. Remember, it doesn't go away, it just goes to the next guy and the next guy. And so the city has these very large stormwater detention ponds and retention areas, and that's because we don't retain enough landscape by landscape, so it compounds as it goes downhill. And 99% of city services are impermeable. You can't soak the water in. Only 1% in the downtown area can soak in. So 1 inch of rain on an acre is 27,000 gallons of water. If you have an acre of landscape that you're designing, try to make that 27,000 gallons soak in, and your water budget has completely changed. It's flip-flopped from irrigation to just catching the rain on the land itself. 1 inch of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof area can store 600 gallons of water. So we can quickly put it into a cistern, but remember, overflow, if the cistern is full, no matter how many cisterns you put in, if they're full, the water is still going to go where it was going to go before you put in the tanks. Green solutions for this is rain gardens. You've seen some examples of this. There are designs on the internet that help you design these. It's specific. You want to, disturb the soil, put in certain things so that the water will soak in a lot easier. But this is Brad Lancaster's drawings showing a landscape on life support, basically. If you direct the water away from your landscape, then you've just got to replace that water. Whereas if you design the landscape so that you're capturing it around the planting areas, you can reduce your paid-for irrigation considerably. And we're seeing some of that here. You saw an example. It's Big Stacy Park at One Texas Center. This is the change. This is the evolution of the revolution that was started before. So you can use rain cisterns to store it, or you can use rain gardens. If you take a rain garden, use this guide that is available to you for rain gardens. Might even be in your handout packet that you'll pick up as you exit. But it's not really a revolutionary change. You just look at a depression in the landscape as a resource rather than filling it up. If it's already running across the surface, then use that area or start a new area. And when you change the landscape a little bit, make a little depression for that to go in, you have seen this before if you've gone to Schulenburg or Fredericksburg and you drive by the old cemeteries after a rain. And in the bar ditches, it just blooms. But without rain, it disappears. Now, if you irrigate these areas, you're kind of wasting a little bit of money. But in the old cemeteries, what escaped the plots ended up in the bar ditches, and that's where we get the best plants for the rain gardens. It's the ones that happen in nature. Now, this is Tucson. Tucson was mentioned. Brad Lancaster lived in Tucson. They wouldn't let him do what he wanted to do. So to your left, you see a curb. This is kind of the back of his housing area. curb cuts were not allowed. Curb cuts now in the city of Austin, we've actually done it. Curb cuts take that stormwater, the water that's flowing across the streets, and allow it to be directed somewhere else. That's the same landscape after the curb cuts. Now the city of Tucson encourages Brad Lancaster's curb cuts. You'll notice the curb cut that he just chopped out down there in the bottom. I mean, it's a ugly looking cut up pickaxe or something, but that's Brad walking there with his wife. But that's the difference. You know, all he did was direct that water into an area, put a few plants there, and then people stroll down there now, and it looked very desolate before. Another marriage that you can do in your landscape designs is if you're doing ornamental ponds, if you use rainwater harvesting to fill your ornamental ponds, and you do not add chlorine to your rainwater, then the city will give you a pass on your ornamental features because they're running off of rainwater and not off of city water. To give you a ratio to think in your mind, a little 10 by 10 garden shed that you may have in your backyard, that's 100 square feet. And in a 1-inch rain, that's 60 gallons of water. So if you put that in your mind, you can do any size calculation. You can do 1,000 square foot roof area, and that's the shadow of the roof, not just the square footage of the house. If it's 2-story, 1-story. If it's pitched like this or pitched like this, folks, it's the same amount of rainwater. It's not going to make any difference as to how much water falls straight down. So there's a house being built here in Austin now on Loop 360 and 2222 that's 27,000 square feet. That house only has 60,000 gallons of rainwater harvesting. You know, it could harvest enough water for a neighborhood. Typical system, you can get online and find out different ideas of how the different parts you're going to put together, how you're going to get this $5,000 from the city of Austin. But you basically are going to have the number one thing, and that's rain. Okay, people say it's not raining. We can't catch water. Well, it has been raining lately, and my phone rings off the wall when it's raining. When it's dry, I can't find a customer anywhere. Wait till it rains, they say, I wish I had that water. You know, it just seems to work in reverse. But the long-term forecast for the South, and particularly for Texas, for the next 10 to 20 years is more intensive drought interrupted by hurricane-induced rains of as much as 16 inches in 24 hours. So, again, this is a little bit of an anomaly we've been getting lately, which is good. But the long-term forecast says periods of drought, downfall, a lot of rain at one time. So many of my clients are doubling the size of their capacity, and I'm saying there's no such thing as overflow. If you've got rainwater tanks that are overflowing, you just don't have enough tanks. So put more tanks in. Tanks come in all different shapes and sizes. You can pretty much meet any restriction that you might have. As far as space restrictions, I'll show you a little bit. The components are very simple. This is at House and Earth, just kind of down the street on 5th Street. But you just need something to kind of keep the leaves out, and you're going to need a first flush filtration device, something pretty simple. We're going to see a little picture here. I put 10 of these along a fence row. I live in a garden home community that there's only 5 feet between my house and the property line. So I put 10 of these along the property line, and I can still walk along. They're 62 gallons apiece, and they hold 620 gallons. I got a rebate from Round Rock. And believe it or not, I can buy those cheaper from one of the big box stores than I could from my wholesaler. And it'll be delivered right to that store, and I can pick them up there. So don't think that, you know, you have to have a wholesaler's source to get some great tanks. Components, if you decide to use pumps, these are available all over the place now. Both cheap ones, throwaway from China that are cast iron, and expensive ones that are stainless steel. So you've got a price range in there to use for your pumps. I would remember that there is this little device that allows you to take these apart and put them in your garage for the winter, either that or maintain your pump house with some sort of a heater or a bulb or something like that in there. Now, if you do use a pump in the city of Austin, you are required to put in an RPZ. This is a reduced pressure zone device. It is a high hazard device. Rainwater falls from the dirty old sky, and so it's considered to be high hazard. I do have opinions that may come up in this presentation, but that's what you got to have at the street, protecting the city's water supply from rainwater if you have a pressurized system. Now, Ellie mentioned that the plumbing code is considering changes and all this. We get involved in this plumbing code all the time, but you have to do certain things. The first flush device, bottom right-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner. It's the same for you as it is for me. Okay. Bottom left-hand corner is how you buy this little device, and then how long the vertical pipe is depends on how much water you're going to, quote, waste in a first flush. What happens is the ball rises, closes it off, and then immediately the water starts squirting out the bottom. At the far left-hand corner, you see those little red discs. They have different size holes, and so those are like an emitter on a drip irrigation system, and it has a hose on it. You can connect it to a plant, and it'll start spitting water out of there. It's wasting a little bit. What it allows it to do is to drain out between rains, so you don't have to clean it out as often. Every once in a while, you have to take it apart and get the leaves out of there. But this shows a very simple system. The one on the right is referred to as a dry system. In other words, the rain is going to go down, fill up the first flush filter, say that very fast, and then go across and go into the tank. Once the rain is over with, the system is dry. The first flush filter even drains out, so it's dry. I'll show you a wet system here in a minute. These are very large separators. These are called vortex filters. They were first invented in Germany. And you see the one on the right, that gentleman can have a very large one. That 27,000 square foot house, I called up Joe Wheeler and I said, we need the largest separator you have to get the debris out of a rainwater tank. And he said, oh no, that's for a 30,000 square foot commercial building. 27,000 square foot house, I don't care, same thing, so that's what he put in. It's bigger than that one, but we did put that in that house. Components. A potable water system is different from a landscape system, and you're going to filter the water, either 2 or 3 filters there, but you're getting the water as clean as possible before it goes into either that horizontal or vertical. You see the vertical stainless steel one. That's where the UV light is. So the light is always on. The water turns on in your faucet. The water passes through the UV light. It kills the bacteria. But if you have a particle floating in there and the bacteria is behind that particle, it will not kill that bacteria. So you want it as clean as possible going through the UV light. The box there is a 365-day countdown clock. When that reaches 0, you replace the light. You've now got a pretty easy, serviceable system. Underground systems. These, I was talking to somebody a little bit earlier, these can be very thin. They actually make these cages as little as 9 inches thick. They started in Australia. But you can put these cages together in basically a pond liner and put a rainwater tank underground, and it just kind of disappears. And in Australia, where they were first done, they had parking lots with 18-wheelers parked on top of these plastic cages, but it can be done. So no matter what space you have, these are available to use. In some cases, I've been able to use concrete septic tanks. You can actually, if you're going to go underground, place in Kyle, I believe, makes custom septic tanks, whatever size. I've put them like railroad cars before. So we can use a septic tank and put rainwater in it, and it does take a big crane to bring one of these in. But you tell them where you want the openings and how you're going to do the overflows and all of that, and you can use the concrete ones. This one is plastic septic tanks. But even though were originally made for septic, you can actually see over on the left one of those vortex filters getting ready to go into there. But once it's covered with gravel or planting areas, these just disappear. You don't see them. This is great where you can dig. If you can't dig, figure out something else, because I once went to a large project underground and the hole cost $27,000. So that's digging in limestone. You don't want to do it unless you just have to. Some of you may have seen these log structures, 4811 Sinclair in Rosedale in Austin, historic building that actually has a little bit of a connection to my family. And 25 years ago, they put in some rainwater tanks, 3 metal rainwater tanks. These rainwater tanks were rolled on a roller at that time that was 100 years old. That roller has been passed through various different people in Central Texas. It's now in Dripping Springs making tanks again. So the same roller, I'll show you a before and after of one of those metal tanks that are made with an old antique metal roller. What we did is we put some of the rainwater tanks, plastic ones, behind roses. So this is actually sitting on the front porch looking out towards 49th, corner of 49th and Sinclair. The old stone kitchen is over there. But we kind of hid some relatively modern plastic tanks, polyethylene, behind some roses, but it still worked. Where they needed to walk to a place where they parked their cars, kind of a carport garage combination, we needed room. So we used 2 of the kind of oblong tanks in tandem, but those are going to be more expensive. And notice there's kind of a hole in the center of one of those. As they get bigger, you may have seen pictures of holes in these oblong tanks. Those are called kiss-offs. That's where they have cast it with the front and the back joined together with plastic, so when the water goes in there, water wants to be round, so it's constantly trying to expand those, so those kiss-offs hold them together. But these were more expensive, but that's the space that the people had to walk by. And you see that as a dry system. The rainwater is going into the top of the tank, and then the overflow is actually going in under the rock pathway. Also in front of what was a corn crib many years ago, it's now a guest house, we put 3 in a row along their parking area, but there is a barbed wire kind of fence there, and I propagated some of my antique roses, and those will now be covering those, so you won't see them from Sinclair. They're still a little bit visible from Sinclair right now. This one has a combination of a dry system and a wet system. You can see the dry system going into the top of it. I'll show you in a diagram a little bit later the wet part of that one. This is the original tanks that were getting rusty after about 25 years and rusting out. So we replaced it with a new metal tank made with the same rollers that are 100 years old that are now down in Dripping Springs. It was called Texas Metal Cisterns, and now it may be called Texas, thank you, dear. Something like Texas Metal Cisterns. Yeah, Texas Metal Tanks. They just change their name every once in a while. When somebody else gets the rollers, then they change them. But notice they're exactly the same. They're just, I'm going to show you a little bit later a map of this or a plan of this, and you can see these from the street if you want to drive by. This is at Miller. This was the second rainwater system to go in at Miller. It was rebated by the city of Austin. It has a dry system. Notice that the pipe goes down to the ground. That's where the first flush is. When that fills up, then it goes across and it goes into the tank. If the tanks move any, you don't want a rigid connection, so that's why they use those black things there. Plus, if a kid comes along and says, I bet you I can chin on that, then you can replace it easy, because I kind of hate those unless they're really hidden away from the athletic kids. Design options. Here's one at Cassis Elementary School, garden classroom. This is a great classroom that was built outdoors, all with donations. One thing for you landscape folks, notice that rock wall in this design. Actually, that is metal on both sides of metal uprights filled with riprap. So it turned out to be cool. And it's at the right-hand parking area of Cassis Elementary School, and that riprap looks just like they, had a rock wall put in. Sorry, I'm hitting these too fast or too slow. But right next to there, they have two 600-gallon metal tanks. Now, these are corrugated horizontally, but they're made, like up north, they're silos. They were grain silos converted to rainwater harvesting. Several companies now do this, and these stand on their own. They're structural. They don't have to have any ribbing or support. There's other brands that have to have an outside frame on them that are metal. I don't like them. I like these because they stand up on their own. Pretty expensive, but this particular company is bringing them in Austin in truckloads in a couple of different sizes. This is a 24,000-gallon tank out at a ranch at Medina, and they bring all 24,000-gallon ones in a truckload. So a 24,000-gallon tank, 24 feet in diameter, a little bit above my head height at the eave there, 10-degree pitch. If you're willing to take this one, instead of this one being about $23,000, it's $15,000 erected on your slab in Austin. So they, instead of waiting for a bunch of conglomeration of different sizes of tanks, get this ranch tank and you save. They also have a 13,000-gallon one that they bring in, but it's $13,000. I'd rather pay $15,000 if I've got the space. Space considerations are always important. First flush system, in this particular one, this is Las Casas Verdes off of William Cannon and Westgate. And that's a very green community, been on the solar tours many times. But he had first flush filters made out of metal from the same metal rolling guys down in Dripping Springs. They were in Kyle at that time. But he had to seal that thing up so that it will hold water. So he did have problems with that, but he wanted that look, so that's a very custom first flush filter. Ferro cement, it's a mixture of Portland cement, sand, Portland cement and sand applied over a mesh with rebar inside it. So you see how the inside tank there, and then the bars eventually were covered with plaster. This actually has two tanks, so you can isolate the water from one tank and the other and service one part of the tank while the other part of the tank is empty or full, so you can switch it back and forth. This is the same folks that had the log home in Rosedale. They had this other log home in Liberty Hill area, and they actually had it beforehand. And we put two 50,000-gallon ferrous cement tanks out there at this site. Ferrous cement is how they build ships. If you Google ferrous cement, half your hits are going to be to the northeast yacht places, so you can either buy you a yacht or you can have a rainwater tank built. Same kind of stuff. They used them in World War II for battleships. This just shows how they're done. The one on the right is one that was partially excavated and then the soil was brought back up to it. I've seen one of these with a putting green on top of it. This is a wet system, so this is the water that's contributed to those tanks coming off of one of their sheds Each one of those three, as you go back towards that tree, has a little first flush filter on it. If you join them together before the first flush filter, you can have a larger first flush filter on the tank. So you've got choices, either at the site of collection, going into a pipe system. The pipe system then goes over to the tank and back up into the tank. So this is a wet system. Everything that's down in the ground is wet until you drain it out. And it should be drained out between rains because it can turn brackish pretty quick. There was some talk about gray water and the gray water use. The problem with gray water is you have to use it within 24 hours or it becomes black water, and black water is what stinks. So you can't store gray water for a period of time. So there's a little bit of problem in using rainwater if you're not, or gray water if you're not using it quick enough. It's not going to smell very good. I'm retired from Austin Energy Green Building, and one of my green builders called me out for a consultation, and he was walking around the side of this brand new house in Rollingwood. They were required in Rollingwood to do 2,500 gallons of rainwater storage. Never heard of it before, but they were on a creek and they were required to store it. He said, okay, we're going to put a tank here, then we're going to build a big rock wall that matches the house in front of it so it blocks it from the neighbors. And I'm walking down this little hill and I turn a corner and I said, what are you going to do under the deck? And he said, oh, that's just, don't worry about that. The tank goes here. And I said, wait a minute, no. What are you going to do with the deck? It's just empty space. It's worthless. I said, well, no, not really. I said, there's something called a bladder that you can have made, custom made. The first one was called Original Rainwater Pillow, and they use them, in Iraq and Afghanistan, haul water around the back of trucks. Put your phone down and quit texting. Listen, I'm telling you about this rainwater system that you need to put your phone down and quit texting. He says, I already ordered it. So he was texting back and forth with the owner of the Original Rainwater Pillow Company, and he wasn't really texting and ignoring me. But he had it ordered before I had all the words out of my mouth, and it fit underneath there. It fills like a bladder. It's like a pillow. Fills full of water, goes back down. Fills full of water, goes back down. Didn't have to build a rock wall around it. Used it, wasted space underneath. Cool system. Design options. 3 tanks in a row. It's usually cheaper to buy one bigger tank than it is to buy 3 smaller tanks. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes. God, this guy had to have a place to park his boat. So 3 in a row were better than one big tank. I got to get to the 5,000. Okay, rotational molding. They let me take a picture of the rotational molder. They wouldn't let me show you the video. It's cool. It's out on Bratton Lane in Austin, but they're making tanks up to 2,500 gallons right now. They're putting a new arm in. They're going to be able to do up to 10,000 gallons here in Austin. So here's the lady we were talking to about the little rain barrels. Here's the way you do this. That's 100-gallon tanks. It's cheaper to buy these tanks at some place like Tank Depot or Tanks for Less because they're made in Austin. They come in all different sizes, all different colors. We even used one for a first flush system. Notice that central pipe sticking out the top. Remember I said that metal tank had to be sealed. This has to be sealed too. But that pipe going up allows the water to rise in the little pipe. So we can use a little small tank there for our first flush system for this 5,000-gallon tank here. Non-potable system. This is in the city of Austin. Notice there is a high-hazard backflow preventer. They were going to use this water inside for flushing toilets. And they still had to have an additional RPZ going right into the house, not only the one at the street, but they also had to have this one. Here's your $5,000. If you're not putting rainwater tanks in your landscape designs, you're giving away $5,000. $1 a gallon is available from the city of Austin for a pressurized system, 50 cents a gallon for a non-pressurized system. You have to dot the I's, cross the T's, fill out the application before you make the purchase. Get together with your homeowner. You may not make $2,500 profit on a small landscape job, but you can add a rainwater tank in there, and the city will pay you $1 a gallon or 50 cents a gallon. So you can walk away with double your profit, maybe as much as $5,000, because it goes up to $5,000 per household at 50% of the cost of the system. So basically, a 5,000-gallon tank gives you $5,000 to work with and up to $10,000 to spend to get the total $5,000 back. There's additional requirements. You know, you have to submit a site drawing. This is what I used for the rebate of the log home in Rosedale. And the one on the left that shows 3 little circles, that's those 3 that you saw. I'm actually getting water off the front of that building and going wet to those tanks, and off the back of the building and going dry into those same tanks. But each one of those roof lines, I was able to show where I'm going to concentrate the water for 4 metal tanks, the 2 oblong plastic tanks, the 2 round tanks in the front, you can barely see the circles there, and the 3 in front of the corn crib. And then the 336 is the metal building, the metal one that you can see from the street on 49th Street. This is right by Rosedale School off of Burnett Road. You also have to kind of show a little bit of a diagram about how the water is going to go. Water does flow downhill, but, you know, the city wants to see a little bit more information in there. Pressurized systems, you have to use the RPZ. No purple pipe right at that location. Now, we talked about purple pipe. Why is there no purple pipe right there? That's the city water. So that's out at the street coming in to an RPZ. That's potable water. So then when it becomes rainwater, then you have to use purple pipe. So it's considered non-potable, so you have to use the purple pipe. People always ask me about BT or some way to control mosquitoes. That's my thumb. I take those, throw them up into the gutters. My neighbors think I'm crazy because I'm going around the house doing this, picking flies out of the air. A little bit in a tank. Excuse me. One large lifesaver covers 100 square feet of water with BT on the top for 30 days if it's not interrupted by rain. So you're going to have to occasionally put BT in from time to time. How did I do? Anybody have any questions? I did go through that fast. I did show you how to get $5,000. I'm going to put this back in my pocket, though. Yes. They change it from time to time. So in what way did they change it recently? The most difference was they went up to $5,000 per household, and you can dip as many times as you want to get that $5,000. So you could do a job for somebody and say, let's get $2,500 from the city, and we'll go back and get $2,500 again. But I urge you, if you're considering it, to get it in there, get them to say yes on your system, because city council session is going on over there right now, and you can hear them talking about cutting rebates or whatever. So get in there and get it while you can. Good question. What to do in freezing weather? Your dry system is going to be dry, so there's no problem with that. The first flush filter is going to drain automatically. There's no problem with that. So the only thing that you have that might have water in it is those buried lines underneath a wet system. But I recommend that you drain those between rains because they get brackish pretty quick. It's a smaller volume of water, and you'd then be pushing brackish water into your tank. So the tank itself will not freeze. The valve, there's a big blue valve there. You might take rags and isolate that and then cover it with plastic so that the rags do not get wet. And that will isolate the valve to the tank. The tank will hold enough heat in there as long as we're going to have freezing weather to not be a problem. Yes, ma'am. Is there a time limit to, is there a time limit to how long you can keep your rainwater in your tank? Lake Travis, they keep it in there a real long time, you know, so it's rainwater. It's just going to be there. It's not going to hurt anything. The little rain barrels that the city marketed for a while, those kind of turned brackish. It's a smaller volume of water. We did do one before the rebate program, actually, at the American Botanical Council, and it's a 10,000-gallon tank, and they ran it through filtration and ozone 6 hours out of every 12 hours. They had an automatic timer on it, and they were stirring that 10,000-gallon tank and filtering it and putting it back in. So, yeah, the more involved you get, you know, but a large volume of rainwater is not going to hurt anything. It's not going to have anything do. It'll settle out some of the debris in the bottom, but that's it.
We've got time for just one more quick question.
Over here, he's been raising his hand.
So I just did some quick math. Each summer, someone with a larger scale house is going to use about 50,000 gallons a week for watering.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, now what's the solution?
Well, how feasible is that to sell to? I mean, what does a 50,000-gallon container look like? Or, you know,
A 50,000-gallon container is 30 feet in diameter and 12 feet tall. A 10,000-gallon tank is 12 feet in diameter and 12 feet tall. And those are going to be made in Austin pretty soon, poly tanks.
I guess you can sell them on it, you know, for 10,000 or 12,000.
Typically in-house in Austin is going to be 2,500 to 3,000 gallons. And you're going to use it on your primary pristine plants. When people say, I'm going to use this rainwater to irrigate my lawn and I'm going to hook it up to my irrigation system, you irrigators know. But I tell them, you know, go turn on your irrigation system after you read the meter, and after it runs through one cycle, a typical Austin yard will use 3,000 gallons of water in one cycle. You're not going to use a rainwater tank on an irrigation system, realistically, unless it's a big commercial property with big tanks. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. If anybody has any more questions for Dick, he'll be up here for a little bit longer. That concludes our Sustainable Landscaping Day. A couple of very quick items. We will have PDFs of the presentations up this week and then taped shortly thereafter. Please do visit www.growgreen.org, then go to the Landscape Professional page, and then you'll go to FAQs. The presentations will be stuck under FAQs on that Landscape Professional page. Please do turn in your evaluations and validate your parking up at the front sign-in. And for those who are coming back in March, we'll be seeing you March 24th, same time, same place. Actually, 8:30 a.m., 9 a.m. for the start of the presentations next time. Thank you all. Drive safely on your way back home. Watch the ice.